Here's the story of a transfer case swap we did on an old broken down Grand Cherokee. This Jeep Grand Cherokee had a 249 transfer case with a bad viscous coupler. It was unfit to drive. A very sought after swap is going from the 249 to the 242 transfer case, eliminating the viscous coupler. Taking on this challenge, Jason, aka the Muscle. You wouldn't assume it from his behavior, but his attention to detail is unsurpassed. And Dale, aka the Professor. You wouldn't believe what his second job is. Let's get started with the mission, the transfer case swap.
JeepSolid.com.
Now it's super important to chalk your wheels really well because we're going to be removing the drive shafts. And as usual, it's a good idea to disconnect the battery as well. There's 3 bolts here that come off to take the skid plate down. And now this is a good point to drain the transfer case fluid. I always like to remove the fill plug first, then remove the drain plug. Okay, next we're going to remove the rear drive shaft here. We're going to take these strap bolts off. When I'm removing the drive shaft, I like to take a little bit of fingernail polish and just mark it so that I can put it back in the exact same spot to keep the balance the same. Okay, now that we got the strap bolts off the back side here, I'm just going to take a screwdriver and kind of pull this out. And then it's going to slip out of the transfer case here. Next we're going to remove these 4 bolts on the front drive shaft that attach the drive shaft to the yoke here. Okay, we got these two bolts off the front drive shaft here. To get to the ones on the back, super helpful tip, jack up one wheel, rotate the wheel, your drive shaft spins to bring the other bolts into place. Or your friend can go too far. Bring it back a little bit. They're there. Now that we got all those bolts out of the way, we're just going to pull the front drive shaft off to the side and leave it on the cross member there. Okay, so over here on the driver's side of the transfer case, we're going to disconnect this rubber hose, this wire harness right up here, and back here there's actually a fuel line bracket that attaches to the back of the transfer case.
To disconnect the speed sensor, I just slide the tab over like this, then depress this back tab right here, and awkwardly pull it out.
We're going to remove the shift linkage from the transfer case. Here we're removing the bolt from the transmission mount. After we support the transmission and transfer case with jack stands, we'll remove the cross member. The cross member is removed. The transmission is supported by a bottle jack and a jack stand. We are removing the bracket that attaches the fuel line to the back of the transfer case. And this is one of the bolts that actually holds the transfer case to the transmission. Here I wanted to give you a good look at the 6 bolts you'll be removing so you can remove the transfer case. They're all pretty easy to get to, except for this one up on the top corner by the passenger side. It's super hard to get to. Let me show you what I did. Okay, getting to this last bolt that's on the top of the passenger side is really difficult to do. But I found it's possible with a 9/16 socket. If you have a knuckle on it and an extension, this one is about 10 inches long. Now this is just a standard socket. I have a deep set socket, but with this slight change to this deep set socket, it creates an angle that it doesn't reach. It has to actually be a smaller socket. And I can just barely fit this up into place and get a little bit of movement with the socket wrench here to get that bolt off. Alright, we got the transfer case disconnected, so we're going to pull the transfer case out of the way now.
Yeah, let it kind of tip back towards the jack.
There you go. Alright. Yep. Nice. Yeah, that thing's a beast. Alright. 249 transfer cases out. We're going to get to the input shaft. First we're going to remove these 4 10mm bolts from the front bearing retainer. Next we're going to remove this snap ring on the input shaft. It helps to have a really good set of snap ring pliers, as some of these snap rings are really difficult to get off. Now we're going to remove the nut that attaches the yoke to the output for the front drive shaft. We're using a big pipe wrench and a 28mm socket. It really helps to set it on the floor where you can get some good leverage on it. Now we're going to remove the 15mm bolts that hold the case together. On this side near the tail shaft, note that this 15mm bolt has the washer on it. And you'll notice on this end of the case as well, this one, the bolts here are a little bit longer and they have a washer on them. And the last one on the top, there's this nut that comes off and then a 12.10mm that we have to take out. On each side of the case, you'll notice a little tab that you can get a screwdriver in to pry the case halves apart. Now I got the case halves apart. This little magnet here fell out, so if that happens to you, this is where it goes. So this is the half of the case that we're interested in right now because we want the input shaft off of it. So we're going to set this off to the side right now. Next we're going to remove this bolt right here. This is actually the shift detente spring. It takes a 7/8 socket and it just holds the shift indicator in position.
Detente, is that French?
Detente. The spring comes out and the little tab. Then the shift fork can come out.
I'm going to push on the input shaft and it's going to pull this entire planetary gear set out.
Alright, next we're going to take apart the 242 transfer case. It's essentially the same process as what we just went through with the 249. So I'm going to put this on time lapse and you can watch us do that. We're going to be going over a rebuild on a 242 transfer case. The reason we're doing this rebuild, this shift fork here, the little plastic tabs that are supposed to be covering these points has worn off, and now this shift fork is really rough. It's been grinding metal on metal. As you can see over here on the magnet is just covered in metal shavings, and there's bits of plastic strewn around the inside of the case from the pads that go on this shift fork. So the bearings on this are probably bad. It needs to be cleaned out, rinsed out real good, and put back together. Alright, first we're going to get the mode fork out of here. So to do that, we're going to remove the little shift detente down here. Then with that shift detente removed, we can kind of get this positioned here so we can get a screwdriver into here and you kind of pry this out a little bit. There is another method for getting the shift fork out by actually removing the roll pin, but I find that this method is the easiest. We got the mode fork out of the way, we can get the shift fork. This one slips out a little easier. We're going to get the magnet out of the way that is covered in metal shavings. So next we're going to remove the planetary gear and input shaft. So we're going to flip her over. Here I'm removing the snap ring for the bearings around the input shaft. It's not necessary to remove this snap ring right now to get the input shaft out, but I'm just doing it because it's here and it's going to have to come out eventually. Now we're going to remove the snap ring around the input shaft. I can't emphasize enough the importance of having a really good set of snap ring pliers, as some of these snap rings can be really tough. This input shaft is the part we're going to swap out for the input shaft from the 249, as this input shaft won't fit. At this point, I proceed to replace all the bearings and seals on this 242 as they were bad. If you want a detailed look at that, you can follow this card right here. It's not necessary to do this if you're just swapping out the input shaft. Okay, now we're going to put the input shaft and planetary gear back into the case, but we're actually not going to use this input shaft off the 242. We're going to replace it with the input shaft from the 249 because we're doing a transfer case swap here. So we're going to proceed to put this back. And here's the final set of bearings to replace. This one actually goes down inside the planetary gears here. You can see it down in there. But we're actually not going to be using this input shaft. We're going to be using this input shaft over here, so we're not going to bother replacing this one right now. I just wanted to show that to you. Okay, we kind of had to tap that planetary gear down into place to get the input shaft to stick out enough so we can get the snap ring on here. Alright, next we're going to place the bearing cap retainer. Notice the little channel right here. It has to line up with the hole in the case right there for oil to flow through. We're going to take a little bit of RTV and put it around all the bolt holes, all the way around the bearing cap retainer here, avoiding this channel because we want to keep that open. And we're going to put a little thread locking compound on these bolts, and then we're going to torque them to 16 foot-pounds. Alright, now here we have the shift fork and the mode fork with the sprockets on it. The sprockets go like this. And this is going to set down in here into the... This one's going to engage the planetary gear. Make sure this sprocket lines up and slide it all into place. And putting the mode fork in place is a little bit harder. We're going to get this sprocket out of the way because we can put it in later. This one you have to get lined up as best you can and then use a screwdriver and kind of pry it down in there. Now we got the mode fork in place, we can go ahead and put this sprocket in. And don't forget to put the magnet back. Now we're going to put the shift detente spring back in place. Now we're going to be putting the cases back together. I wanted you to see this right here. This is a little tab that slides back and forth. And this is a real special thing with these two bolts that have these washers on them. These washers help push those into place to keep the case halves lined up properly. Alright, we got everything put back in. We're ready to put the two case halves together. Before we do that, we're going to take a little bit of transmission fluid, +4, and dribble just a little bit on some of the gears here so it doesn't run dry when it first starts up. I just wanted to include this as a good reference for the bolt pattern layout for the case halves.
I was reading some funny things on forums like...
Alright, we're double checking that the oil pickup, the magnet, all the pieces are where they are supposed to be, and we're going to seal this case up. Helps to have a friend, obviously, do this. All I could find was Jason. That'll work. Okay. Get a couple bolts in here. And we got a little thread locking compound on the bolts. Alright, now we're going to go along and torque these case bolts to 30 foot-pounds. We're going to torque the shift detente plug to 15 foot-pounds.
Right now we're just going through and making sure that this is shifting correctly. I've got it in neutral right here.
That's your JeepSolid voice.
Yep. It's in neutral, none of the drive shafts are turning.
Alright, let's go through the gears.
Okay, we're going to try 4 low. 4 low.
This one is spinning real slow.
And the front shaft is spinning slow too. Back to neutral. Neutral works just fine. We're going to come out one more.
So lastly, we have the shift indicator to put in place and the speed sensor as well. Those are pretty simple. They just go in the same way they came out. Basically, 242 rebuild is done.
Awesome.
Good job. All right, well, today's a pretty exciting day. We are going to be installing this rebuilt 242 into the Jeep Grand Cherokee.
JeepSolid.com.
We're going to replace the yoke to the front drive shaft and torque this to 110 foot-pounds. You don't even have to wrestle it.
You've almost got it on the shaft.
Yeah. Push. Got it. Now that we got the transfer case in place, we're getting all the nuts replaced. On the driver's side, up at the top of the transfer case, be sure you get this little bracket in place for the fuel line before you put the nut on here.
Maybe I could like split the cost of the motor with you just so I can I feel like you should be doing this part because you took it off, so you know all the tricks.
Yeah, getting those bolts on can be a little bit of a pain. I'm going to connect the speed sensor. And we're going to torque these transfer case mounting bolts to 26 foot-pounds. Now we're going to replace the cross member, attach the transmission mounting bracket to the cross member. We've got to jack it up first. We're going to lift the transmission up into place. All right, we're going to torque these cross-member mounting bolts to 30 foot-pounds. We're going to replace the transmission through bolt and torque it to 45 foot-pounds. All right, we got some ATF plus 4. We're going to fill it up here until it starts to leak out of that fill hole.
Why is it bleeding?
We're going to torque the fill plug to 30 foot-pounds. Now we're just going to attach the front drive shaft. Got a little bit of thread locking compound on here. We're going to put the bolts in and torque them to 20 foot-pounds. So we're going to put the rear drive shaft in place. I've got a little mark on my drive shaft here that lines up with the yoke, so I know I get it back in the same spot. We're going to slip this end into the rear output. I'm going to get the strap bolts on here and torque these to 168 inch-pounds. You can see I got a little Loctite on these guys. The last thing we're going to do is take the shift linkage and hook it up to the tab here. Alright, the next step in this transfer case swap, going from the 249 to the 242, is the shift linkage adjustment. Alright, there we go. We got the shift linkage hooked up to the tab. And now up here on the shift linkage, there's a bolt there you can see right here. You can loosen that to adjust the shift linkage. We have the tab all the way to the back, which is 4 low. Now I'm going to loosen this adjustment bolt and have somebody in the cab pull the lever all the way back to 4 low and then tighten this down. I've loosened the adjustment bolt. Okay, go ahead and put it into 4 low. You got it in 4 low? Now I'm going to tighten this down. Okay, we got that tightened down. Now we can run through the gears. Okay, here we're in 4 low. There's neutral, 4 full-time, 4 part-time, and 2-wheel drive. We're going to disconnect the lights and the cigarette lighter and get this panel out of the way. We're going to remove the 3 screws that hold the Vehicle Information Center display in place. So here we're going to disconnect this red plug. Because we had the NP249, the red plug was attached. So now we're going to expose the black plug and attach that. And we're going to put it back together. And the display is working. You can see actually here, watch these, the wheels actually light up. So right now we're in 2-wheel drive. Jason just switched it to part-time, which is full-time 4-wheel drive. And now if he keeps going back, it switches to full-time, which means like all-wheel drive, and you can see all 4 wheels are lit up. And replacing the bezel is as easy as taking the old one out. It just pops off. Here I'm actually just changing out the display. Oh hey, you're still here! You actually watched the whole thing! Thank you so much. I hope this swap video really helped you out. Do me a favor, leave a comment below, ask a question, make a comment about something you like or something you found helpful. It took a while to do this swap, long enough for me to grow a beard. Thanks for watching, have a good day.